Jake Morrison heard the silence before he saw the empty cabin. No smoke from the chimney, no sound of axes splitting wood, no children's voices carrying across the Montana Valley. The Henderson homestead sat abandoned in the afternoon light, its door hanging open to the mountain wind. His horse shifted nervously as he guided her down the rocky slope. 3 days tracking stolen cattle had led him here, to this remote valley where something had gone terribly wrong. The scattered belongings around the cabin, the broken fence posts, the unnatural stillness, all told a story Jake had seen too many times before. Jake dismounted slowly, boots crunching on pine needles and debris. Whatever had happened here, the survivors were long gone. Or so he thought, but something made him stop. A small pile of berry stems near the clearing's edge, fresh stems picked clean with desperate efficiency. Someone had been eating huckleberries recently. His eyes swept the tree line with practiced skill. There, a broken branch at child height, a scrap of blue cloth caught on thorns. Someone small had moved through here, staying to shadows, surviving on whatever the mountain offered. "Hello?" he called out. "Anyone out there? I'm not here to hurt you." Silence answered, but it was different now. The kind that breathed and listened and tried to decide whether death had found it again. Jake walked to his horse and pulled his canteen, setting it on a fallen log 20 feet from the tree line, then stepped back. "Water," he said to the forest. "Clean water. And I got food if you're hungry." He made camp as if planning to stay, built a small fire as sun sank behind peaks. All the while, he felt eyes watching from darkness between trees. When full dark came, he heard it. Soft rustling of someone moving through underbrush with careful steps of prey that had learned to avoid predators. The sound circled his camp, staying beyond firelight's reach. The canteen was gone when he woke at dawn. For 3 days, Jake played the same careful game. He would leave food on the log, hardtack, jerky, once a can of peaches. Each morning, the offerings were gone, but whoever took them remained a ghost. On the 4th morning, he woke to find something new beside his bedroll. A handful of huckleberries arranged on bark. An offering in return, or maybe a test. That afternoon, while watering his horse at the creek, he saw her. She stood at the clearing's edge like a wild thing that had forgotten it was human. Maybe 8 years old, maybe 10. Hunger and fear had made her ageless. Her dress had once been blue, but dirt and berry stains had turned it forest shadow color. Her hair hung in tangles around a face that was all eyes and sharp cheekbones. Jake sat down slowly by the creek, making himself smaller, less threatening. He cupped water and drank, showing her it was safe. "I'm Jake," he said quietly, not looking directly at her. "What's your name?" She didn't answer, but she didn't run. Progress. Jake pulled jerky from his pocket, tore off a piece, set the rest on a rock between them and moved away. The girl's eyes followed the food with focused intensity of someone who had learned the next meal was never guaranteed. When she finally moved, it was with quick, nervous motions. She grabbed the jerky and retreated before tearing into it with teeth that seemed too large for her thin face. "You been out here since—" Jake gestured toward the cabin, not finishing. Some things didn't need words. She nodded once, sharp and economical. "You got people? Somewhere you need to go?" This time she shook her head, and Jake saw something that might have been tears before she looked away. As evening came, she was sitting 10 feet away, still poised to run, but no longer vibrating with immediate flight. "What's your name?" Jake asked again as he built up the fire. This time she answered, "Lucy." Her voice was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse. "Lucy Henderson?" She nodded. "I knew your pa. Good man." He didn't mention knowing Henry Henderson from cattle business, that he'd been one of the few homesteaders who treated cowboys with respect. Lucy's eyes filled with tears she wouldn't let fall. "They came at night. Pa told me to hide in the root cellar. Said not to come out no matter what I heard. You did right. Your pa would be proud. I heard Mama screaming. I wanted to help, but Pa made me promise. Sometimes the bravest thing is staying hidden," Jake said. "Sometimes running away is the only way to stay alive." That night, Lucy slept within the circle of firelight for the first time in a week. She curled up like a fox kit, ready to bolt, but trusting enough to close her eyes. Jake sat awake planning what came next. A 10-year-old couldn't survive a Montana winter alone. But taking her to town meant authorities, people who would make decisions without understanding what she'd survived. Sometimes the bravest thing is staying hidden, Jake said. Sometimes running away is the only way to stay alive. That night, Lucy slept within the circle of firelight for the first time in a week. She curled up like a fox kit, ready to bolt, but trusting enough to close her eyes. Jake sat awake planning what came next. A 10-year-old couldn't survive a Montana winter alone. But taking her to town meant authorities, people who would make decisions without understanding what she'd survived. Lucy's first real meal in 8 days was beans and coffee. She ate with desperate focus of someone who had learned food might disappear, pausing only to watch Jake's face for signs he might change his mind about sharing. "Slow down," Jake said gently. "Ain't nobody gonna take it from you." "How long since you had a real meal?" he asked. "Before," Lucy whispered. The word carried the weight of a world that had ended in blood and screaming. "Well, reckon we need to get you someplace safe. Someplace with people who can take care of you proper." Lucy's spoon clattered to the ground. No people. People did this. Jake saw fear spike in her eyes, her whole body tensing for flight. He'd seen the same look in horses that had been broken too hard. "Not all people," Jake said carefully. "Some people are like the ones who hurt your family. But some are like your pa and mama. Good folks who'd never raise a hand to a child." "How do you tell the difference?" Lucy asked. And Jake heard a lifetime of fear in the question. "I reckon you watch what they do when they think nobody's looking. You watch how they treat things smaller than them. You watch their hands." Lucy looked down at Jake's hands, weathered and scarred but gentle as they fed wood to the fire. "Your hands helped me," she said. "And they always will, as long as you need them to." That night, Lucy asked Jake to tell her about the world beyond mountains. Not the dangerous parts, she'd learned enough about those, but the good parts. Places where children went to school, where families gathered for Sunday dinners, where Christmas trees glowed with hope. "Could I learn to read?" Lucy asked as the fire burned low. "Course you could. Smart girl like you. You'd probably teach the teacher a thing or two." The next morning, Jake spread a newspaper on a flat rock and began pointing out letters, showing Lucy how they formed words. She absorbed lessons with fierce concentration of someone who understood knowledge was another survival tool. As days passed, Jake found himself changing plans without realizing it. Heading directly to town, he took detours to show Lucy things she'd never seen. Deer drinking at hidden pools, eagles' nests high in cliffs, meadows where wildflowers grew like God's own quilt. Lucy began talking more, asking questions about everything. Jake found himself seeing the world through her eyes, remembering wonder that existed before experience taught disappointment. But even as Lucy began trusting him, Jake could see shadows that followed her. She still startled at sudden noises, still positioned herself where she could see exits, still hoarded food. The healing would take time. One evening, Lucy asked the question Jake had been dreading. "What happens to me now?" Jake looked at this child who had survived horror through resourcefulness and courage, who was learning to trust despite every reason not to. "I don't rightly know," Jake said honestly. "But I promise you this. Whatever happens, you won't face it alone. Not while I'm breathing." That night, Jake made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The town of Sweetwater sprawled along the valley floor like wooden toys scattered by a careless child. Jake and Lucy sat their horses on the ridge overlooking it, both reluctant to descend into the world of people and complications. "We could keep riding," Jake offered quietly. "Head up to Canada. Start fresh where nobody knows our business." Lucy looked at him with those two old eyes. "But then I'd never learn to read proper, never go to school like other children." "There's a woman in town," Jake said. "Mrs. Sarah Whitmore. Runs the boarding house. Used to be a teacher. Lost her husband in the war, never had children. I'm thinking maybe she'd understand about needing time to heal." "Would she want me?" Lucy asked, and Jake heard the fear underneath. Fear of being unwanted, being too damaged. "Any woman with sense would count herself lucky to have you," Jake said firmly. The Sweetwater boarding house stood at the street's end, painted yellow with white trim. Flowers bloomed in window boxes and lace curtains fluttered in the breeze. It looked like the kind of place where children might be safe. Sarah Whitmore emerged onto the porch, a woman of perhaps 40 with graying brown hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Jake Morrison," she said. "Been a while since you've graced our little town." "Mrs. Whitmore, I was hoping we might have a word about the child." Inside, everything was clean and comfortable. Jake told the story simply: the dead family, the girl surviving alone, the week they'd spent traveling together. "Lucy," Sarah said finally, "Jake tells me you've been learning your letters. Would you like to show me?" Lucy carefully wrote her name, then the words Jake had taught her: horse, tree, home. "Very good. You have lovely handwriting. With practice, you'll be reading books in no time." "Real books?" Lucy asked, the first word she'd spoken since entering. "All kinds of books. Stories about faraway places, tales of brave children who overcome impossible odds." Jake saw the hunger in Lucy's eyes, the longing for knowledge that had driven her request to come to town despite her fears. "The girl's been through more than any child should bear," Jake said carefully. "She's going to need patience, understanding." Sarah smiled with wisdom that came from years of working with children who carried small tragedies. "I've been teaching children for 20 years. I've seen what cruelty can do, and how resilience and love can heal even deep wounds. Lucy would be welcome here for as long as she needs." Lucy looked between Jake and Sarah, understanding a decision was being made about her future. For the first time since he'd found her, Jake saw her straighten her shoulders and speak for herself. "Would I have my own room?" "You would." "And I could learn to read all the books?" "Every single one." Lucy turned to Jake. "Would you visit sometimes, to see how I'm doing with my letters?" Jake felt his throat tighten. "Wild horses couldn't keep me away." That evening, as Sarah helped Lucy settle into a bedroom with actual walls and a real bed, Jake stood on the porch watching sunset behind mountains. Part of him wanted to ride away quickly, before he could change his mind. But another part knew this was what love looked like sometimes: letting go so someone you cared about could have the life they deserved. As stars emerged, Jake heard something he hadn't heard since finding Lucy: the sound of a child's laughter drifting through an open window. Sarah was reading to her, and Lucy was delighting in the magic of stories told in a warm, safe place. Jake mounted his horse and rode slowly out of town, carrying with him not the broken, frightened child he'd found living on berries and fear, but the brave, curious girl who was learning to trust in happiness again. 3 months later, the letter arrived on a Tuesday. Sarah Whitmore's careful handwriting filled 2 pages with updates about Lucy's progress: how she could now read simple books, how she'd made a friend named Emma, how she still asked about Jake every single day. But it was the last paragraph that made Jake saddle his horse before dawn. "Jake, Lucy's been having nightmares again. She keeps asking when you're coming back, and I think she needs to see that you kept your promise. Would you consider a visit?" When he reached the boarding house, Lucy was sitting on the front porch with a book in her lap, her hair clean and braided, wearing a blue dress that actually fit. She looked up at the sound of his horse's hooves, and Jake saw the exact moment recognition hit her. "Jake!" She dropped the book and ran to him, throwing her arms around his legs with fierce intensity. "Hey there, little scholar," Jake said, kneeling down to her level. "Heard you've been reading up a storm." "I finished 3 whole books this month," Lucy said proudly. "Want to see my room? I have my own window and everything." That evening, after Lucy had shown Jake every book she'd read, Sarah and Jake sat on the porch while Lucy helped in the kitchen. "The nightmares started about 2 weeks ago," Sarah explained quietly. "She wakes up calling for you, asking if you're safe in the mountains. I think as winter approaches, she's remembering being alone." "She trusting you, though?" Jake asked. "Oh, yes. She's a different child than the one you brought me. But you're her anchor, Jake. The person who proved to her that the world contained kindness as well as cruelty." That night, Jake sat on Lucy's bed as she showed him a journal she'd been keeping, pages filled with careful handwriting about her daily lessons and letters she'd written to him but never sent. "I wrote you every day," Lucy said, turning the pages carefully. "Mrs. Whitmore said it was good practice." Jake read a few entries, his throat tightening at the mix of childhood observations and hard-won wisdom in her words. "Lucy, Jake said carefully. What would you think if I told you I've been looking for a place closer to town? Somewhere I could visit more often? Lucy's eyes went wide. You mean you'd live near Sweetwater? Close enough that you could see me every week if you wanted. Close enough that when the nightmares come, you'd know I was just over the ridge. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, processing this possibility. Would you still be Jake the Cowboy? She asked finally. Always, Jake promised. I'd just be Jake the Cowboy who lives close enough to help with your arithmetic homework. Lucy smiled then, the bright, uncomplicated smile of a child who had learned to believe in good things again. I'd like that. I'd like that very much. As Jake tucked her in that night, Lucy held onto his hand with the grip of someone who had learned the value of not letting go. Jake, when you move closer, can you teach me to ride a horse properly? Reckon I could manage that, Jake said, smoothing her hair back. We'll start with the gentlest horse in all of Montana. And Jake, thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for teaching me what promises are worth keeping. The next morning, Jake began making arrangements to lease the old McAllister ranch just 5 miles outside Sweetwater. It wasn't much, a small cabin and enough land for a few head of cattle, but it was close enough to matter, close enough to be part of a little girl's daily world instead of just her memories. As he prepared to leave town, Lucy stood on the boarding house porch, no longer the wild, frightened child he'd found in the wilderness, but a young girl with clean hair and a bright future, waving goodbye with the confidence of someone who knew the people she loved would always come back. Because some promises, Jake had learned, were too important to keep at a distance. Jake returned to Sweetwater 2 weeks later, not as a guest this time, but as someone who belonged. The old McAllister ranch wasn't much, just a weathered cabin with a sagging porch and a pasture that needed mending, but it was his. More importantly, it was close. Close enough for Lucy to count on. Close enough that the distance between them was no longer measured in miles but in footsteps. He spent the first days working from dawn to dusk, repairing the fence, patching the roof, and clearing out the brush behind the barn. Each task carried the quiet satisfaction of purpose. At night, he'd sit by the fireplace and read the letters Lucy kept sending, slipped into his saddlebag when he wasn't looking, or handed to him shyly by Sarah when he came by for supper. They were full of childlike wonder and unexpected depth, drawings of horses, new vocabulary words she'd learned, even questions about the stars. Jake started visiting every Friday afternoon like clockwork. He'd help Lucy with her arithmetic homework, then the two of them would ride around the field near the boarding house. He brought with him an old mare named Molly, gentle as snowfall, and Lucy took to her as if they'd been paired by fate. At first she held the reins with trembling hands, unsure of her posture, but under Jake's calm instruction, she grew more confident each week. Her laughter would echo across the meadow like a song neither of them wanted to end. One evening in late October, after Lucy had gone to bed, Sarah and Jake lingered on the porch again. The air was crisp and the moon hung low, casting shadows on the road that wound toward the hills. She's changed, Sarah said, sipping tea from a chipped mug. Not just on the surface, there's something steadier in her now. Like she believes the world won't fall apart tomorrow. Jake nodded, his gaze on the horizon. She's the bravest person I know, Sarah, and I've met some hard men in the mountains, but Lucy, she keeps waking up, keeps hoping even when life's told her not to. Sarah glanced at him. And you? What keeps you hoping? He didn't answer right away. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, one of Lucy's latest letters. This one wasn't filled with drawings or spelling words. It was a single line, written in the uneven scrawl of an 8-year-old, still learning her penmanship. You said you'd come back, and you did. I believe you now. Jake handed it to Sarah. She read it in silence, then blinked hard against the tears forming in her eyes. I didn't just come back for her, Jake admitted softly. I came back for myself too. By early November, the town of Sweetwater had begun its quiet transformation for winter. Smoke curled from chimneys. The general store displayed woolen mittens in its window, and even the horses seemed to move a little slower in the chill. Jake had nearly finished repairs on the cabin and started preparing the ranch for the first snowfall, stacking firewood, checking the feed stores, and reinforcing the barn's doors against the wind. Lucy's excitement about the changing seasons was palpable. She kept a running list in her journal of things she wanted to do before the snow got too deep. Ride Molly in the snow, make snow angels, and drink hot cocoa with Jake on the porch. That last one made Jake smile whenever he read it. Her world had once been full of uncertainty. Now, it was filled with plans. One Saturday morning, Jake surprised her with a trip up the ridge trail, where the trees still held a few golden leaves and the view of the valley stretched for miles. He packed a small lunch, biscuits and apple slices, and they rode in silence for a while, Lucy holding the reins with the ease of a rider who trusted both her horse and her guide. "Jake?" she said after a long stretch of quiet. "Yeah, little scholar. Do you think my mom would have liked it here?" Jake's breath caught. It wasn't the first time Lucy had mentioned her mother, but it was the first time she'd asked a question like that. He looked over at her face half lit by the morning sun, and saw not just curiosity but a hunger to connect the pieces of a past she barely understood. "I think she would have loved it," Jake said finally. "She'd have sat with you under that big maple tree and read every book you own." Lucy smiled faintly. "I don't remember her voice." "I try, but it's like trying to hold water in your hands." Jake reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's why you've got people now who can remind you what love sounds like. Sarah, me, we're not trying to replace her. Just help you carry the good parts forward." She nodded solemnly. "Do you think she's proud of me?" Jake looked at her, really looked, at the girl who had survived loss and fear and loneliness and still managed to ask if she was loved. "I know she is." They sat for a while longer, watching the wind stir the leaves. Then Lucy turned her horse toward home, her posture tall and sure. That night, Jake sat on the edge of his bed, turning Lucy's journal over in his hands. She had given it to him earlier with a casual, "You can read it if you want," and now he traced the pages like they were treasure maps. Among the entries was a new one dated just that morning. It read, "When I was scared, I used to think the stars were too far away to help me, but now I think they shine because someone like Jake promised to stay." Jake closed the book and stared at the fire. He'd known many roads in his life, twisting mountain trails, endless plains, rivers that ran cold and wild, but none had led him to something as profound as this. The quiet redemption found in the steady love of a child. Thanksgiving arrived with a quiet grace that settled over Sweetwater like snow on a still morning. The townsfolk bustled in preparation, pies baked in warm ovens, hay wagons loaded with firewood, and laughter echoing through the general store. Jake had never given much thought to holidays. In his years of drifting, they were just dates on a calendar, reminders of places he didn't belong. But this year was different. Sarah invited him to spend the day at the boarding house where she and Lucy were preparing a modest feast. When he arrived, the table was already set with a mismatched collection of dishes, candles flickering gently in glass jars, and the aroma of roasted chicken — no one in town could get their hands on a turkey that year — filled the room. Lucy wore a soft red sweater with a tiny embroidered horse on the front, her hair tied back with a ribbon Sarah had found in a chest upstairs. She greeted Jake at the door with a proud grin and held out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote a speech," she declared. Jake raised his eyebrows. "A speech, huh? Hope I'm not in trouble." Lucy giggled. "It's a gratitude speech. Mrs. Whitmore said we should write what we're thankful for." He unfolded the paper slowly, scanning the crooked lines. "I'm thankful for books and warm beds and Mrs. Whitmore's pancakes, but most of all I'm thankful that Jake kept his promise. Because when someone keeps a promise, it means the world is not all bad." Jake didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply bent down and hugged her, holding tight, careful not to crush the paper still in his hand. Dinner passed with warmth and laughter. Jake even brought his harmonica and played a few slow tunes by the fireplace, much to Lucy's delight. Sarah watched them quietly, the ghost of a smile on her lips. She had seen too much of life to believe in perfect endings, but she could believe in healing and new beginnings, especially when they looked like this. Later that evening, after the dishes were washed and Lucy was curled up with a book, Sarah and Jake found themselves once again on the porch. Jake was quiet for a long time. "I'd been writing for days. I was cold, hungry, and just wanted to get over the ridge before nightfall. But then I heard something, barely more than a whimper. I thought it was an animal at first. Then I saw her. Small, silent, trying to disappear into the snow. He swallowed hard. I don't know what made me stop. Just something in me knew I couldn't ride past her. Maybe it was fate. Maybe just dumb luck. But looking back now, I think it saved me as much as it saved her. Sarah nodded. Funny how rescue can go both ways. The fire inside crackled low, and from the window came the soft glow of lamplight. Inside, Lucy was safe. And more than that, she was loved. Before Jake left that night, Lucy handed him a second note. This one was shorter. When you come next Friday, can we decorate the cabin? I want to help you make it feel like a real home. Jake carried that note all the way back to the ranch, tucked close to his heart.